Last week, the Saints front office and coaching staff flew all around the country evaluating college prospects at their pro days. One position kept coming up over and over again: quarterback. They were looking at prospects day one, day two, and day three. Kind of caught me by surprise, and it's making me start to think we were questioning, will they draft a quarterback in the first round? Now the question may be, what round will they draft a quarterback? I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Before we get into, quite honestly, the video that I wasn't planning on recording that well, obviously ended up recording, um, this point in time, still making the disclaimer, we still have roughly a month till the NFL draft. A lot of things can change in the conversations that we will be having leading up to the draft. Hell, probably even the morning of the first day of the draft. But for right now, I, I I'm just kind of floored when in that rush last week, because a lot of the top pro days and even some of the ones we're not going to mention had players not necessarily from the quarterbacks we were looking at. The biggest one being we had to send our running back coach all the way to Boise State during this process for Genty. But most of these are creeping up. You were seeing as we were sending guys on planes, when they were stopping, quarterback names kept coming up. And it kind of just piqued my interest. And you can tell me down in the comments if you know that anytime in the last, I don't know how many years, when we were talking about, hey, pick what year the conversation started as Drew started to decline, but definitely once he retired up until this year, conversation was always coming up. We really need to look at the draft and see if the young quarterback, if you want to use the word franchise, elite, whatever, but if that quarterback's in the draft, we need to go find him, bring him in, and get him ready to be the young quarterback that's going to lead this franchise for a decade. Let's just put a number on it. If there was a full court press, like I'm about already mentioned to you out there, I missed it. Normally, when we draft a quarterback, we kind of hear afterwards, especially look in the last 2 years, Rattler and then Hayner the year before that. It's like I never heard a whole lot of they were on our radar. Sort of like some of these guys are obviously on our radar. But after we drafted him, then the Mickey or the coach or whoever would kind of, well, this is what we were thinking. This is, whatever. The second thing I need to say here is the combine gets a lot of, it's the big event, right? And you have a lot of all 32 teams there. You have a lot of players there in short relative spans of time trying to impress. And it is geared towards what the NFL wants in a prospect, kind of overall. Meaning they want them to run the drills a certain way. They're looking for certain things, etc. The pro day is more, I think, about the player getting the chance to go, okay, we want to showcase the stuff we do well. So I think the Saints have always been big on two things on pro days because there's conventional NFL wisdom, and I think we can agree most of the time during the draft, the Saints sometimes have their own wisdom in ranking a draft board, and I think a lot of that comes from they do have a lot of interest in the pro days. Not only the talent of the player, but they do want to meet with him because I think for whether it worked out or not, one of the things that they push is we want to have the right players in the building, and that includes talent, but the intangibles, I guess, would be the best way to say it. And they try to actively search for that and not get caught unawares. Doesn't always work, but I appreciate the effort. That's kind of the way you can be so all in on, say, Alvin Kamara in the third round in 2017. After that draft, they talked extensively how they met with him, and it wasn't not only his ability, which was obvious to everyone, but his knowledge and understanding of the game of football and meeting with him on one-on-one, that he had a already before he showed up, before they drafted him, had a real good understanding of what the Saints offensive staff was trying to do back in those days with the running back position in the running game. So I said all that to say, to set up why this is just really, really just caught my eye going. And again, in the comments, if I'm wrong on this, let me know what year and when and who. But I've never seen like a full court press over the span of about 5 days, this many quarterbacks. And these are the ones we know of. More on that in a second. But the list started off, and everybody was aware, with good reason. Cam Ward right now is the pretty much the consensus number one guy in the draft as far as quarterback, and possibly the number one overall. And that was on March 24th. And they sent a lot of guys down to Miami to watch him, but not only him, tight end over there, Arroyo, Restrepo, the wide receiver, and I know some guys on the defensive line I think are drawing interest there. Next day on March 25th, let's get on the plane and go to Austin. So Quinn Ewers in Texas. Now there was again a lot of other Texas players. They ended up taking Ewers, and some of those Texas players, I think a lot of the look was on defensive line, to a private dinner to sit down, have a conversation with them. March 26th was Ohio State. Again, a lot of players we're looking at there outside of the quarterback position, but Will Howard was mentioned as a guy that drew some of the Saints coaching staff interest. March 28th, Jaxson Dart, Ole Miss. And again, that's another one, some defensive linemen and some other position players sitting there that would pique the Saints' interest as filling a need. But all their eyes were on Jaxson Dart. And another one where private meeting, private dinner reported with him and some other players. Shown a lot of interest just beyond what went on the field. In between there was a report that our quarterback coach, Scott Tolzien, on March 27th, flew to give a private, what I saw, they said private workout to Syracuse quarterback Kyle McCord. Also heard, but in all the ones I've mentioned so far, I've seen multiple places, whether on Twitter, well, mostly on Twitter, whether it was some of the Saints reporters talking about it, or even going to certain pro days and seeing the official Twitter account of that school listing teams that were there and mentioning the Saints were looking at Jaxson Dart and holding taking him to a private dinner, for instance. But one of the names that comes up that Scott Tolzien may have also been flying around and working out privately is Tyler Shuck, quarterback for Louisville. The one name I haven't heard of, I tried really hard to confirm, and I could not find anything definite, is Shedeur Sanders. But this is my opinion, inferring from the names we're pulling out here, I got to think they're doing the same due diligence on him that they're doing on all these other guys. If not more, this is what we know. For instance, something we did learn at the Boise State was not only that day when we sent our running back coach to evaluate his pro day, he mentioned afterwards, well, the Saints have been in a lot of contact with me this offseason. There may be some others. There may be some other quarterbacks. There may be more contact than we know about. I feel like Shedeur Sanders has to be in that conversation, even though we don't know for sure. So I do take all this with a grain of salt. But this kind of in a short span of roughly 5 days total was like a full court press that we know of on the quarterback position. And but tie it all in with something that I remembered these tweets when they happened, but it was an exchange from January 31st. And it took me a little while to go back and find it, between Dan Orlovsky, who's a on-air talent, ex-NFL quarterback for a couple of years as a backup, an on-air talent in ESPN's NFL coverage, and Matt Miller, who's one of their draft scouts, who had this little exchange. And this wasn't, they were trying to break news or anything, but this was right about the time it was coming out that the Saints were going to hire, before the Super Bowl was actually played, but the Saints were going to hire Kellen Moore. And Orlovsky kind of started out the conversation that Kyle McCord and Kellen Moore seems like a good fit for the for the Saints. And he was just kind of throwing something out there just to do it like people sometimes do on Twitter. And Miller responded with the have heard the Saints front office love Spencer Rattler, but it's fun fit. And I know if you want to go down and find the tweet and see the timeline and the gobs of it stirred a conversation up. But in no point were they saying, hey, Kellen Moore's going to go get Kyle McCord and he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints this year, like some people were trying to make it out to say. It was just a fun little convo. But the thing that stuck with me in my head from the jump, now this is prior to the hiring of Kellen Moore, of Scott Tolzien, and of course of Doug Nussmeier, your head coach, quarterback coach, and offensive coordinator. But I have heard the Saints front office love Spencer Rattler. I'm going to leave you with this thought. The front office, I get it. They drafted or brought in the current quarterbacks on the roster. And there may be people up there that love, whether it's Carr, Rattler, or Haener, don't know. I am not saying any of them are great quarterbacks, not saying any of them suck. Doesn't matter in this conversation because the important point here is when you go through what the Saints have gone through, the hiring process they did of why they wanted to bring Kellen Moore in, why Doug Nussmeier came with him, why Scott Tolzien's important, why it's important. These three guys, these are the ones that have been going all around the country the last week, talking to quarterbacks, working out quarterbacks, watching them work out, having meetings with them, having dinner with them, and everything else. I don't care who the Saints front office loves at quarterback. In the sense, the guys that are basically staking their jobs on everything, it sounds like, in finding the quarterback of the future is more Nussmeier and to a lesser degree Tolzien. I want to know who they love. I want to know more about why they're looking at who they're looking at as much as possible. And unfortunately, we're not going to probably find that out unless we actually draft somebody on that list and something happens. But what I don't want to happen is a quarterback or quarterbacks shoved down their throat. It is likely to happen in 2025. But after that, it's got to be the guys they love. They're the ones that have to make this work. It's kind of out of the front office hands. And I don't necessarily disagree with who the front office loves or doesn't love, but I don't want quarterback decisions being made on who Mickey or Jeff Ireland or whomever loves. The full buy-in has to be, for better or worse, for more on down on that staff. I believe it will be. I believe there's no choice that it can go any other way. But at this point on, now that we have the coaching staff, they're involved in this process, I don't really want to hear anything coming out of the front office about loving a quarterback any different than what the coaching staff that has to work and build the offense around is loving. Buy-in's got to be 100%. And on that note, at first I kind of dismissed it. But in Moore's opening press conference and a couple of times since, there has been, the media has tried to get him to commit to Derek Carr, and he kind of danced around it. But I don't think there was a big giant I do think he's going to be the starter all in from Kellen Moore. And I think Carr felt that from the jump. I don't know if there's any real support coming out at a high level for Rattler or Haener for those of y'all that love those two guys. And there is a thing around the NFL when the new coaching staff comes in, especially an offensive staff this heavy in quarterback analysis and in quarterback building, that they want their guy. And in Kellen Moore specifically, over this amount of time that he's been in the NFL, he inherited Dak Prescott, he inherited Justin Herbert, and he inherited, of course, Jalen Hurts. So he's never truly gotten the chance to go get his guy. So I acknowledge the fact that they're doing their due diligence only for trying to really find their guy. In the case of, let's just take Kyle McCord, because he last year in the NCAA was their leading, statistically was the leading passer in NCAA at Syracuse. Had a really outstanding year numbers wise. You drill down a little deeper, a lot of people look at him as a day three guy. But they're not necessarily looking at him as a day three guy as not viable. My kind of favorite, Trevor Sikkema, kind of comped him to maybe a Brock Purdy, maybe a Baker Mayfield, just doesn't quite have Baker Mayfield's arm. I'm going, look, as a day three guy, that's just like drafting Spencer Rattler as a day three guy. But if they love whoever the Saints may draft, and I feel like there's a push. This is really sounding like a push. They're at least pushing to find the matchup that they love. And I think that's really the question of, will they draft a quarterback? Is the guy they love in there somewhere? Have they met him? They go, that's what we want to try to do. And at the very, very least, even if they don't find the guy they love, they're at the point we're going to roll with the guys we got this year and then figure it out next year. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe you take the swing on one of those, like a McCord on day three. I'm not really sure. But I feel like at the very, very least, we're aggressively, for the first time, maybe ever, the biggest takeaway I can take away from this whole thing is we are actively trying really, really hard to find the quarterback we love, that we know or think we know. There's the quarterback of the future. We're going to do everything in our power to make it happen, to get him in here, use that as a catalyst to start the rebuild, the turnaround, or whatever you want to call it. So, like, this is the point in the video where I'm going to ask you to make the algorithm happy, with the like, the share, the subscribes, the notifications. You may want to double check your notifications, because I just had a little rash myself personally. I don't know if this is affecting anybody else, but it's worth mentioning if you want to check it. Some of my notifications kind of got unchecked, and I think it's just a glitch that happens every now and then. So you may want to double check yours, especially since we will be going live soon. I told you this week. Sorry, it cannot happen this week. It will definitely happen. You'll see this video on Monday, 1 week from Monday. That will be the final, not the final, the first live stream kind of moving into the draft and into the 2025 season. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. And the rest of this week, we're going to focus. I'm really going to try to focus in on 9, which is I wanted to start doing today. But like I said, as I was trying to pull some information together on 9 from these pro days, it's just quarterback kept coming up. And I'm not the only one that noticed it, because I know over the last few days, it's a lot of the Saints followers, whether it was videos on YouTube, the radio guys at 104.5 ESPN in Baton Rouge, Twitter. I mean, it was so obvious it could not be noticed and talked about. So I was like, there's no way I can go by and not talk about it. And my take on, I think, which is whether we draft that quarterback and whether it works out in 2025, I think it's a good start and something different than what the Saints have done in the past. So we'll see how it turns out. This is like the third or fourth video in a row I've done on drafting quarterbacks, so I really want to move away from it. You missed any of the earlier ones, right here on the end screen, I'm about ready to pop the playlist for the 2025 draft. They'll all be in there. You can go back, kind of look what I saw earlier, said earlier, or refresh it. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.